This being Wednesday, let's get right to our weekly series, Flashpoints, with our senior national security analyst, Juan Zarate. And Juan, let's start this week, as we often do, with North Korea. Speculation is on the rise that Kim Jong-il, the supreme leader there, might be about to step down, preparing to step down. Tell us what you see.
What we have, I think, Wyatt, is the setup for succession. The ruling Workers' Party has established a date for its next meeting, the first such meeting since 1980. It's being billed as the most important recent meeting in North Korea in terms of its leadership. And what we're likely to see is the preparation for the succession. I don't think you're going to have Kim Jong-il actually stepping down at this party meeting. But what you will have is the laying on of hands of his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, and likely giving him a senior post, as well as giving a senior post to Kim Jong-il's brother-in-law to act as a regent, a mentor to the youngest son. And so what you have next week is a likely setup to succession, which is important to North Korea and China in particular, which want to see the stability in North Korea, where there's a lot of problems happening.
Gotcha. What do we know, if anything, about the son? What his inclinations are, what he is talented at, what he's not?
Very little. There's a lot of speculation about his personality, what we know. We know he went to school in Switzerland. He's 20-something. Some say that he's a hardliner like his father, but I think a lot of this is just speculation, trying to read tea leaves. I think the fact that there have been indications out of South Korean press indicating that he's not ripe yet to take the reins, I think is an indication that there's not yet enough faith in his not only standing internally, but perhaps standing internationally to give him the reins of power in Pyongyang.
And Juan, very quickly, why does Kim Jong-il feel the pressure, if it is international pressure, to make his succession known or succession plans known? Why is that important?
Well, it's important in part because of indications that he's been sick. He suffered a stroke, recall. There's a sense that now at 68 he's failing in not only health but potentially power. And the succession has to come at some point. And so I think in the mind of Kim Jong-il, if one can speculate, I think he's doing this sooner rather than later for the purposes of building stability in the transition. The key here in North Korea all along, the golden jewel is stability. Stability in transition and in power structure. And I think that's what they're trying to do next week.
Let's move on to flashpoint number 2, and that's in the Middle East. In Iraq, where U.S.-aligned Sunni fighters face an uncertain future given the withdrawal of American troops. Now, Juan, why is that?
Well, what you have now is really an assault on the Sunni Arab al-Anbar awakening. This was the group, recall, that rose up against al-Qaeda, that in context of the surge of American troops in Iraq in 2006, 2007, really took the fight back to al-Qaeda, changed the momentum, and dampened the sectarian tension which really threatened the stability of Iraq at the time. And what you have now is really an assault on those individuals. You have assassinations, bombings, ambushes by al-Qaeda members who are now going after them. And fortunately, what you have is a loss of momentum of that group, of that leadership, who were once allied with the United States.
What are the Shiites doing? The Shiite leadership in Iraq, are they looking the other way? Are they assisting, or are they opposing?
Well, these groups, often called the Sons of Iraq, and there's different names for the different groups that were allied with the U.S., were supposed to be integrated into the Iraqi security services. Now, the problem two ways. One, the Sunni Arabs don't have full faith and confidence in the Shiite-led government. Some concerns about the sectarian divisions there.
Right.
And as well, the Shiite government has not done a good job of integrating them. You hear lots of complaints about individuals not being paid, not being given positions they were promised. And so there's a loss of faith in the government itself. And I think this has long-term implications for the stability in Iraq. It also is a question as to whether or not a counterinsurgency strategy, which relies on people like these, can really work if you don't have a long-term plan for their integration.
And that strategy worked very hard to make sure that Sunnis felt included. They were part of the fold. If the Sunnis are now uncomfortable in any way in the instance of an American withdrawal, does that have long-term implications on whether Iraq itself holds together?
Absolutely, because you still have sectarian divide, sectarian tensions, distrust. The hope was that not only the surge and the political machinations that went along with it would unify the groups, but it would set the table for long-term stability in Iraq. If you have fissures continuing to grow and lack of stability in Iraq because of a lack of a government, you really have a prescription for continued tension and potential instability in that country.
Well, let's move to flashpoint number 3, and that flashpoint goes to Somalia. And with its long history of violence and bloodshed and civil war, it looks as if with the rise of another Islamic extremist groups that things are not improving, but they're getting worse. In Somalia, Juan, what do you see there?
Well, the battle for Mogadishu continues, and you have the battle between the putative government of Somalia, the transitional federal government, and the extremists, the al-Shabaab movement, which is ideologically aligned with al-Qaeda, has an extreme agenda. They have mounted more and more attacks over the last few weeks. You saw an attack just recently on the presidential palace. The fighting continues, and you also have infighting within the transitional federal government. The prime minister just resigned, some tumult within the governance of that group, and so things are not going well in Mogadishu. I don't see Mogadishu falling to al-Shabaab, but I do see continued fighting with the likely increase of troops from Uganda and other countries to try to support and buttress the transitional federal government.
Well, and that's the point. Is the transitional government there in trouble?
Well, it's a little bit, it's in tumult, I would say, because the fighting continues, and it's intense and it's real. But what's really at play here is whether or not they can be legitimate. Can they establish some semblance of legitimate governance? With the resignation of the prime minister, that's put into question. The other thing I would say is there's a question as to whether or not Somalia continues to be an international threat. You have, for example, the MI5 chief for the UK, the Internal Security Service, saying recently that he's concerned that it's only a matter of time before we see terrorism on our streets inspired by those who are today fighting alongside al-Shabaab. And so Western security services, including the FBI, are concerned that what's happening in Somalia has not only ripple effects in the region, but also in our countries.
Instability there goes widespread.
Exactly right.
Let's go to flashpoint number 4, and that one comes from Libya. In our final flashpoint, a former jihadist leader based in Libya has written an open letter to Osama bin Laden calling for an end to al-Qaeda's armed struggle. Juan, what's going on there?
This is a bit of good news, and I always like to end on sort of a high note if we can. This is part of a growing trend of ex-jihadis and those within extremist circles who are questioning al-Qaeda's leadership, the legitimacy of their agenda. We have to keep in mind al-Qaeda's popularity has plummeted over the last few years. Bin Laden's popularity is down. Support for suicide bombings is down. And so in this letter, which calls for a ceasefire, and it's entitled Al-Qaeda, Your Armed Struggle is Over, it adds to the echoes of discontent within Muslim circles to the leadership of al-Qaeda. And the essence is, you've brought us nothing but death and destruction. Your program is bankrupt, and it's time to reassess and time to pull back. It's a powerful message from the leader of the former Libyan Islamic Fighting Group.
How do you think this plays on what's called the Arab Street? Will people look at this as signs that jihad itself is a failed mission?
Well, I think it adds to the debate. I don't think it's the final nail in the coffin. This comes from Noman Ben Othman, a credible actor. In fact, in the letter, he reveals the fact that he was with bin Laden in 2000, part of a council in which he raised objections to 9/11 or to the next attack which was coming, which is a revelation here. So I don't think this is the final nail in the coffin, but it adds to the debate. And one thing to keep in mind is that al-Qaeda cares about its legitimacy, its perceived moral, theological, and political legitimacy. And so this stings, this hurts al-Qaeda, and you'll start to see, and you've already started to see al-Qaeda fight back, retort, and make the argument, as Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 from al-Qaeda, said the other day, that we're winning in Afghanistan, our program is working, stick with us. This letter confronts that very notion.
Senior National Security Analyst Juan Zarate, thank you very much for those flashpoints on this Wednesday.
Thanks, Wyatt.